Caught it. I caught it. Hello, everyone. It is Saturday, the 5th of April, 2025, and I tried to get on X. Still not able to. I don't know why, because I have a premium account, and it is what it is. Before I get into anything, because the title of my video is regarding the last 100 years, a century of deception, I like the title. I've been working on a letter or a dissertation essay, whatever you want to call it, trying to put together just like a brief synopsis, like a paragraph, two at the most, of like major events of significance that have impacted the world internationally. And it's friggin' hard because there's so many details I can go into like more thoroughly. And so to wrap it up, it was a bit of a challenge, but I want to read my rough draft. I've shared it on LinkedIn already, and there's already things I've updated and things I've included that I didn't put in. And so this is going to be a working document. All right, here we go. I found it. Okay, it's long, but again, it's 7 pages of the last 100 years. So anyway, again, rough draft. I want to see first if you can actually see it. No, you can't. Yes, you can. All right, amazing. Okay, just make sure that my volume is good. All right, we're good. Back at it. Okay. Exposing engineered crisis and consolidated power, a path to reclaim sovereignty and secure freedom. To whom it may concern, throughout the past century, supranational elites have shaped international events, manipulating crisis for their benefit and undermining national sovereignty. From the early 20th century to today, wars, false flag operations, and engineered crises have been used to consolidate power and suppress dissent. As an international security analyst, I have studied these patterns and examined how corporate interests, government, military-industrial complexes, intelligence agencies, and financial elites have manipulated key events to serve their geopolitical and economic goals. This assessment will cover the significant events that have defined history since the 1900s, from World War I, the rise of totalitarian regimes, and the collapse of empires, to the World War II era, 9/11, Capitol riots, the Freedom Convoy, the pandemic, the current Ukraine-Russia conflict, and more. And there's a lot more. I will analyze the key figures and organizations involved. Additionally, we will explore the role of crisis actors, false flags, and media manipulation in controlling narratives and expanding elite influence. Early 20th century, the formation of supranational power. The early 1900s saw the rise of corporate elites and the consolidation of financial and political power. World War I, 1914-1918, was a critical turning point in the shaping of modern international power. This war, while officially fought between European nations, was largely driven by financial institutions, including the Rothschild family and other international banking families, whose investments in both the Allied and Central Powers ensured that they emerged from the war stronger than ever. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, backed by British elites and Zionist movements led by figures like Chaim Weizmann, promised the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This agreement not only altered the political landscape of the Middle East, but also revealed how elite interests could manipulate geopolitical decisions to maintain control over strategic regions, particularly those rich in resources such as oil. And I say there's other minerals as well that I don't talk about, but I will add. The aftermath of World War I saw the collapse of empires, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian, and the creation of new states under the control of both European powers and international financiers. The establishment of the League of Nations and the subsequent United Nations in the mid-20th century, and NATO and others, the Five Eyes community, anyway, in the mid-20th century further embedded supranational governance, where the true power often lies not in the elected officials, but in corporations and banking institutions working behind the scenes. And I'm also talking about people like Bilderberg, WEF, the World Health Organization, CDC. Another major event of this time, the Holodomor, 1932-1933, a man-made famine in Ukraine, saw the death of millions of Christians, but millions of civilians, under the Stalinistic regime. This genocide, fueled by Stalin's policies, and again, this was communism, and enforced by the Soviet government, was a critical movement in demonstrating how supranational powers could use covert economic control to suppress national identity. Western powers, including the US, chose to overlook this event as Soviet Russia served the broader geopolitical interests of international elites seeking to balance the rise of capitalist economies. There's so much more I can get into. Like even their own government, like I was saying, was targeting agriculture. They were targeting Christians. So many churches were demolished. So many people like removed from their lands, or there was indentured slavery or slave labor. And we're seeing the start of that in Canada, and it's terrifying. The Reichstag fire, a classic false flag tactic. The Reichstag fire of 1933 remains one of the most notorious examples of a false flag operation, where the Nazis, under Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring, engineered a crisis that allowed them to seize total control. By blaming the fire on communist agitators, and it was Maurits van der Lubbe, who was a 24-year-old activist, communist, he was executed. And his trial, like it came out, this guy was exonerated afterwards, but he did not start the fires. And even from the court hearings, the law enforcement officer, whoever it was, he even said that he drove Maurits van der Lubbe to the Reichstag, the parliament, that's parliament in German, and the fire had already been started. And this guy was blamed and executed. Do you see the theme? This was 1933. Anyway, so I'm just giving more details. See, there's so much that can be put into this. And anyways, by blaming the communist agitators, Hitler used the event to justify the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed the Nazis to crush opposition. This false flag tactic, creating an event, often violent, that can be blamed on an enemy, has been used repeatedly in history. The Reichstag fire served as a precursor to later false flags, like the 9/11 attacks, which were similarly used to justify warrantless surveillance, militarized control, and war profiteering. The Reichstag fire and the subsequent Nazi rise to power were financially backed by corporate entities such as IG Farben, a chemical conglomerate that worked closely with Nazi officials. Oh my God, so many false flag events too. Like even the staged and planned coup in Ukraine in 2014, which was backed by CIA influence. This was a false flag blamed on activists and protesters. There's such a common theme. The connection between corporate powers and political control through false flags became a recurring pattern that would continue to shape the world through the mid-20th century, influencing both U.S. domestic policy and foreign interventions. World War II, totalitarian regimes and corporate interests. World War II, 1939 to 1945, represents one of the most extreme examples of elite manipulation and covert financial backing. Adolf Hitler, supported by corporate elites like IG Farben, which had financial ties to Standard Oil and the Rockefeller family, rose to power with the backing of powerful German industrialists. While the Nazi Party and its rise to power was ideologically motivated, it was also financially enabled by supranationalist elites, including U.S. banks and corporations that profited from Nazi military activities. The Nazi regime's support from corporate interests extended to the military-industrial complexes, while companies like IBM and Ford helped Nazi Germany carry out their economic policies, including the operation of the concentration camps. The war itself became a financial boon for Western corporations, especially those invested in military production and technology. These corporations maintained their influence in the post-war period, with companies like Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin emerging as key players in military contracts. And there's others too, obviously NASA, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman. I can go on. The Holocaust, one of the greatest atrocities of the 20th century. I would say that there were many atrocities in the 20th century, so I'm going to, it's one of the greater ones too, but the Holodomor. There were more civilians that were impacted and killed during the Holodomor, if you look at that, than there were possibly during the Holocaust, and so many other events. And so anyway, I can go on from there, but was not only one of the product of Nazi ideology, which was a socialist party, by the way, but also the result of corporate interests in the exploitation of slave labor and human resources. The financiers who supported the Nazi regime were able to profit from this dark chapter of history, leading to the consolidation of power and wealth among the elite few. The assassinations of JFK and RFK, lifting the veil on elite manipulation. The assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were significant events that exposed the lengths to which powerful elites would go to maintain the status quo. I could add MLK in there as well. Um, Kennedy's opposition to the military-industrial complex, particularly his interest in de-escalating the Vietnam War and his attempts to curb the CIA's growing influence, made him a target. The Warren Commission's findings, despite overwhelming evidence of a cover-up, point to the extensive influence of intelligence agencies and financial elites in orchestrating and controlling the narrative surrounding his death. I could go on. I've talked about so many different people that were involved in the assassination itself, things that have came out leading up to it, witness accounts. I've shared Mark Lane's work, Judith Baker, who knew Lee Harvey Oswald. Like there's so much out there, like given names too about people that were part of cartels and mafias from the U.S. and from other countries, including Israel. And so like I've gone into extensive details about JFK, and so look at my videos, and the Dulles brothers and LBJ and oh my God, Bush, Crayford, Wallace, Malcolm Wallace. Like I can go on. Hunt. Like, anyways. And then Robert F. Kennedy, where people are saying that like it was an impossibility, including RFK Jr. saying this impossibility that Saran killed JFK. Sorry, RFK. And so look at my videos on that. Robert F. Kennedy's assassination similarly revealed the elite's willingness to eliminate any threat to their grip on power. RFK's stance on civil rights and his opposition to military interventions made him a target, and the official investigation into his death has been called into question for its failures to address critical pieces of evidence. Crisis actors, witnesses who lied under oath, and media that was complicit in pushing misleading narratives all serve as prime examples of how false flags and elite manipulation have been used to control political outcomes. And so even with JFK, I could talk about the police officer Tippit, who looked a lot like and was around the same age as JFK. And within hours, he was allegedly killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. I've said who possibly did it. Leggett or something like that. Like I've got so many notes on this that I can refer to, and that he was he was used because and he might be the one that's buried in Arlington Cemetery, but possibly his like brain and body used because of people wanted to cover up the fact that there was more than one shooter, and that there were more wounds sustained by JFK, including the tracheal wound that was the lethal wound. And anyway, I'm going over the place, but the Cold War, the rise of supranational institutions and proxy wars. The period following World War II, known as the Cold War, actually before we even get into that, like also during this time, 69 is when they faked the moon landings. Faked the friggin' moon landings. Like a huge cover up, irrefutable evidence. Or at least evidence that people should look more into because it's very compelling. And look into Bart Sabrell's work, his documentaries on a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. There's another good documentary on astronauts gone wild. I've done so many videos on that. And the Challenger event, I believe it was 86, where the astronauts are still alive. At least 6 out of the 7 of them still alive and well. And Gus Gruesome getting murdered. Anyway, I can go on. So many things I could put in here. USS Liberty, Northwoods. I've talked about these in so many different videos. You know, Northwoods 67. Liberty, the same thing, around the same time. The period following World War II, known as the Cold War, saw the rise of supranational organizations like the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and more. Again, like I've talked about this, these institutions were created in part to manage the post-war world order, but they were also designed to serve the interest of Western financial elites who thought to expand capitalist influence worldwide. Throughout the Cold War, both the US and the Soviet Union engaged in proxy wars to expand their influence over key regions. The CIA played a significant role in orchestrating covert operations to support military groups and authoritarian regimes funded largely by drugs, like the narco cartels, like CIA influence and backed all of the friggin' world, not just in Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, but also in Afghanistan, also in so many other areas. Look more into the opium wars with China. Anyways, that align with Western or Soviet interests. Figures like Allen Dulles, the CIA's director, were instrumental in these efforts, including the CIA-backed coup in Iran in 1953, which overthrew Prime Minister Mossadegh and established a US-friendly dictatorship. There's so many examples of that as well. In many of these conflicts, corporate interests like ExxonMobil and Standard Oil supported US efforts to secure oil-rich regions, while the military-industrial complex, including NASA, I wanted to put that in, profited from arms sales and defense contracts. A turning point for state control and militarization, 9/11. And I've covered 9/11 a lot. Loose Change is also a really good documentary on that. So the 9/11 attacks was another planned event where the shadow government and individuals like Bush, Cheney, and Silverstein, FBI, Mossad, CIA, and more were involved. 9/11 marked a turning point in the expansion of surveillance states and the militarization of society. While the attacks themselves were a devastating tragedy, the subsequent response was carefully engineered to consolidate power under the guise of national security. The Patriot Act, passed shortly after 9/11, granted sweeping surveillance powers to the NSA, CIA, and other intelligence agencies while stripping citizens of basic privacy rights. The Patriot Act is a tax on every airline ticket purchased. So when you buy your airline tickets, there's a Patriot Act tax on it. Like, we've been paying for this, and where does that money go? All of it, right? In the aftermath of 9/11, the military-industrial complex, companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon reaped immense profits from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I haven't even talked about BlackRock and Vanguard and JP Morgan. Like, I have in videos, but again, I have to add this in. So before you start screaming at me, I'm just saying I know. Anyway, they reaped immense profits from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and other ones, which were justified by the narrative of a war on terror. The Bush family and figures like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Netanyahu, and George Tenet were key players in orchestrating the U.S. response, ensuring that the U.S. would remain militarily dominant in the Middle East. The CIA and FBI played crucial roles, and NATO as well, in expanding the U.S. intelligence community's reach, setting the stage for the total surveillance society that we live in today. The military-industrial complex has expanded into private military contractors such as Blackwater and Oracle and Pegasus and Palantir and others. These cybersecurity, AI, digital surveillance, mass international surveillance companies. These are also private military contractors. Elon Musk is a military contractor. Peter Thiel. Anyway, which became a powerful force operating in places such as Iraq and Afghanistan. Anyway, the pandemic, COVID-19, and technocratic control. The COVID-19 pandemic can be seen as an engineered crisis that allowed for the expansion of supernatural control over public health systems, economies, and personal freedoms. The international response was strategically manipulated to benefit corporate elites and technocratic institutions. The World Health Organization, in collaboration with organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, worked with pharmaceutical giants such as Pfizer and Moderna and the CDC and the NIH and so many others. Worldwide implemented lockdowns, mass surveillance, and vaccination mandates. These measures allowed companies like Amazon and Google to expand their influence over economic systems as they profited immensely during lockdowns by monopolizing e-commerce and data services. The COVID-19 response also involved biometric tracking, contact tracing, and the rollout of digital currencies, making a significant step towards a technocratic society where elite corporations and governments control virtually every aspect of life, like the CBDCs. Anyway, however, behind the narrative of public health, there are those who see the climate change agenda as part of the same deceptive system of control. The introduction of carbon tax, for instance, is another supranational tool used to financially exploit nations while perpetuating the illusion of a climate crisis. Rather than addressing legitimate environmental concerns, these taxes enrich corporate elites and finance organizations that benefit from climate change hysteria, such as green tech companies and carbon tax credit markets. These initiatives do little to address actual environmental problems, but create new forms of economic control, allowing elites to profit from the carbon trading system, while natural disasters, in some cases, are engineered or exaggerated to keep the public in fear. And this is where DARPA and HARP, geoengineering, cloud seeding, EMF technologies, ground penetrating systems, things like that come into play. Laser beams, you name it. January 6, 2021, a manufactured crisis for political control. The events of January 6, 2021, at the US Capitol are a clear example of how a manufactured crisis can be used to justify political control and militarized repression. The storming of the Capitol was framed as an insurrection. Actually, I'm going to take that out. It wasn't a storming of the Capitol either. It was framed as an insurrection, but it wasn't. I've done so many videos on this. I have, like, where I have names. I have who they worked for. I have people that were acting as like public officials who were not. They were crisis actors and role players. I've shared media manipulation. I've shared where people that were alleged to have died did not die, or if they did die, it was not connected to January 6th. I shared where there were people lying under oath, like even state Capitol Police and other law enforcement like David Lazarus and Harry Dunn lied under oath and got people jail time for years, or not even having the opportunity to have bail, even if they were peacefully protesting or not even in attendance in January 6th. So this was completely Nancy Pelosi also involved, the pipe bombs being planted. I could go on. With Ray Epps as well, like even the night before, talking about like inciting violence, instigating in order to elicit more of an emotional response in people. And again, young people are very influential, and especially young men, right, to commit like more, I would say, severe crimes, right? Like there's more aggression, more rapes, more murders come from like men that operate on the more extreme right end of the behavioral spectrum. In the aftermath, the FBI, CIA, and NSA ramped up monitoring of dissidents and began a systematic crackdown on individuals connected to the protest. The Biden administration used the events of January 6 to justify the criminalization of political opposition, with key players like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer advocating for a tougher stance against those who challenged the status quo. The events of January 6 have since been used to push through legislation that further erodes civil liberties and consolidates state power under the guise of national security. It's all coming out. The Freedom Convoy, a stand for sovereignty and autonomy. In early 2022, the Freedom Convoy protests in Canada became a symbol of resistance against government overreach. The movement began as a protest against COVID-19 vaccine mandates, but quickly grew into a broader challenge to the authoritarian nature of government control. Ottawa, the Canadian capital, became the focal point for peaceful protests where truckers, farmers, and working-class Canadians stood unified against state-sponsored coercion. Top levels of government, under the direction of Canada's political elite, were accused of planting crisis actors, honeypots, and creating false narratives to delegitimize the movement. Allegedly, Brian Fox, a key figure, again I'll say allegedly involved in the controversial flag incident, was reportedly protected by several law enforcement and security professionals. Further complicating the situation, the Canadian government, led by Justin Trudeau under the advice of elitists like Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, invoked the Emergency Act to freeze bank accounts and suppress the protest, revealing the extent to which the government and elites would go to silence dissent. Marco Minichino and David Lametti, members of parliament, discussed employing tanks into the crowd, Freeland called for peaceful protester. Sorry, Freeland called the peaceful protesters terrorists, and Kerry called them seditionists. I say us because I was involved peacefully. And Marco Mendicino was the public safety officer at the time. David Lametti was a member of parliament. These were text conversations that they had about employing tanks on people. When I talk, and so there's proof. I've shared proof for years. This allegedly could be Brian Fox. Again, this was not answered when Marco Mendicino was under oath. He didn't want to answer that if he knew him or not, because he was possibly the one wearing the balaclava. I have photos of him going up the Chateau Laurier with multiple different law enforcement, unfortunately, or security professionals around him, and then even the photographer, camera guy, whatever, for Justin Trudeau as well with him. Right, this was a political plant, and it was to make people look like they were extremists, white supremacists, all of the stuff that they were calling us, and Mark Carney calling us seditionists. Ridiculous. And it was very much peaceful. Anyway, this manipulation of and Marco Mendicino also, and so many again of these people, they lied in cabinet, and they were called out for it. I shared where they lied, even alleging that arson and other events happened. They were trying to tie it to the Freedom Convoy and protesters, and people repeatedly and consistently said that is not true. This was not at all related or related at all to the Freedom Convoy. These events that you're discussing. And there were a lot of paid protesters, yet again, that were part of the BLM, Antifa, woke, like Hamas, like those groups, where you see just by virtue of their locations on their phones that people can track. They say that roughly 84 to 86% of like people that do the more leftist protests, like at this point, 84 to 86% of people within the crowds have been to more than 10 or more protests like of similar like leftist agendas, right? And so they're paid to do this and or have no lives and no job. And anyway, I can go on about the Freedom Convoy, about Helen Gruce and Tamara Leash and Chris Barber and Pat King, and how there was such a two-tiered justice system during this time. But there were a lot of people within government that were really trying really hard at the expense of their careers and their livelihoods, all of that stuff, to share the truth, even like in all levels of government, including CSIS. I've given them a hard time, but like again, they were trying to share information to the government at the higher levels that were just refusing to look at it as well. So I just want to make that clear. So many other issues with this as well, but this manipulation of public opinion and media narratives backed by government involvement was used to paint the Freedom Convoy as a threat to national security, despite its overwhelming peaceful nature. The Ukraine-Russia conflict, proxy wars, and elite interests. Again, one little paragraph, but I can talk about the ghost of Kiev not being real. This was media and political propaganda. The Snake Island, the allegedly like the Ukrainian soldiers that died on Snake Island by Russians. This was not true. Alive and well. The Polish farmers, this was Ukrainian air defense. They tried to blame it on Russia, try to call for Article 5 or Article 6, which is NATO involvement in the war. It includes Canada. And again, what is wrong with people for that? And Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 blowing up, one completely. This was, again, NATO Ukraine. Seymour Hersh also, again, confirmed that as well. So it's not just me. I could go on about Russia, Ukraine, and about how a lot of the money is not even going to Ukraine. It's going to lobbyists, the shareholders, and the people that are high up of the military, pharmaceutical, industrial complex, and military contractors and corporations I'm talking about. It's also included in that. And the heads of the banking systems who are assisting in the money laundering. And a lot of the weapons are getting sold on the black market to people that hate Westerners, people. And I could talk about immigration and the replacement migration and how the people are doing it strictly to maintain liberal or democratic, like these parties to be in place, even though they're so corrupt. They're so corrupt. And and how there are Nazis in Ukraine still, right? Not all, obviously, but people that have been indoctrinated at like a very young age. There's a lot of Ukrainians that are speaking out on this as well. There like, and again, I could talk about the political prisoners, religious prisoners that are in Ukraine right now. Like, so much corruption, and it's finally getting called out, right? I'm not getting called a pro-Russian propagandist anymore because again, I've been calling out Russia on this as well. Like, I'm not saying that I trust Putin or that I'm promoting what he's fucking doing either. Sorry for swearing, that was unnecessary. But we have to address, like, even the staged and planned coup of 2014. Like, this was even with CIA involvement in this. This is serious, and NATO involvement. And there are people that I talk to that are Canadians representing Canada, that are generals, high-ranking officers all over Europe, but also like in Ukraine, and they're painting they're eating what's being fed to them by people that are lying and are corrupt, and they're profiting off these proxy wars. They don't care how many Ukrainians die, or if Canadians and Americans die too. They don't care because they're getting money. It's all about money. And so he's on, no offense, I'm on the ground. I'm like, good for you. I know people that are on the ground. I've been to Ukraine, before, obviously not during the war. And so I just you don't know what you're talking about. And here's the proof. And again, they don't want to have that conversation. It's okay. I think at some point their hand will be forced to having these conversations. Yeah. So I talk about them profiting. Israel-Palestine media manipulation and elite power. The Israel-Palestine conflict remains one of the most manipulated geopolitical issues, where Western media, lobby groups, and supranational institutions, APEC, and also involved, work to push an agenda that favors Israel military actions while ignoring the Palestinian perspective. The media manipulation is driven by powerful entities, like I said, Alison, Netanyahu, and Raytheon, which have financial interests in the continuation of the conflict. I should say Palantir and Pegasus and Oz, Oracle, Mossad. Anyway, the U.S. government, under both Republican and Democratic leadership, has consistently supported Israel, providing military aid and political backing, while ignoring human rights violations against the Palestinian population. So they're giving financial aid. It's not even just military, and they get more money by far than any other friggin' country in the world. They were up to over $300 billion. And then there's military aid, and then there's other aid and assistance provided. And then Egypt is a close second. Ukraine, I think, is third or fourth. And it's not even close to going to Israel and to the people on the ground that need it, and Ukraine, etc. Government funding of terrorist groups, a dangerous paradox. One of the most critical and often overlooked issues is the indirect and direct funding of terrorist organizations by governments. The US in particular, and Canada, has been involved in funding groups through third-party countries like Qatar, which have supported both radical groups and so-called moderate factions with the aim of instability in the Middle East. These groups, often labeled as terrorists, are used as pawns in a much larger geopolitical chess game, where strategic interests outweigh the human cost of the violence and instability they sow. This funding is part of a broader effort by powerful corporate and military interests to maintain control over strategic resources and geopolitical positions at the expense of sovereign nations. So strategic resources, I'm talking about oil, the minerals like the gold, the silver, the cobalt, the lithium, the nickel, all of that. Farming. Intelligence agencies, including the CIA, have been implicated in these covert operations, using financial backing and military assistance to shape the political dynamics in the Middle East. So yeah, I talk about media manipulation more. Almost done. I'll just skip through. So the media manipulation creates a divide between the information provided in different countries, making it difficult for ordinary citizens to discern the truth. The elites have learned to control the flow of information, shaping public opinions to support their own interests and maintain their hegemony. Conclusion. The engineered crisis of the past century, from World War I and World War II to 9/11, the pandemic, the Ukraine-Russian conflict, the Freedom Convoy, reveal a common thread of manipulation by elite powers seeking to consolidate control. Through false flag operations, media manipulation, and covert operations, these elites have shaped international narratives, suppressed sovereignty, and eroded individual freedoms. And then I go on from there. But anyways, I'm going to have to add the shape of the earth stuff, like the pseudo-scientific revolution that we experienced. And again, I'm not entirely convinced that it was the 1700s for that. And I did want to share some more. I was looking at the Canaanites and the religion that came from that, the religions that came from that, which is like most other religions. I'm talking about now in what we're calling Jerusalem, and how, like I've talked about, how there's so many different themes and similarities to all different cultures and religions, where there's some kind of a divine being that created the entire cosmos, and then within the cosmos, there's like divine beings that I think we're misinterpreting. I think that these are the luminaries. The luminaries are the seven original um, planets or wandering stars, that whatever you want to call it. I've talked about them so many different times before, but and how throughout history, um, they've been represented by these like various different figures throughout history, and so it's basically so many different names that and languages that are explaining the exact same thing, or very similar to the exact same thing that happens within this cosmos, with this divine clock, right? So when we're talking about the seven wandering stars or original planets or planes, whatever you want to call them, I'm calling them luminaries, and I'm saying the sun and the moon's possibly sonoluminescence happening with them, and then cymatics for the other luminaries. And but yeah, where you got the sun and the moon is considered to be one of the seven original wandering stars or luminaries, and often represented by the sun, for example, represented by Jesus, Mithras, Horus, Dionysus, Baal. Um, there's so many others I can talk about: Krishna, Apollo, etc. Some kind of a divine being, virgin birth, like around the 25th of December, being reborn again. And how it's throughout history. And then the moon. Oh, sorry, and it's a masculine figure, and the moon, Isis, Mary, Diana. Like there's so many. Mary, I already said that. Um, Shiva. Anyways, there's so many different Isis, if I haven't already said her, who represent the moon. And then you've got Mercury, Venus, like Venus, Dawn, Hemera, Eos, Aphrodite. There's so many different representations of Venus as well, and Venus rules over Libra and Taurus for the zodiacal belt, or Mazalot or Mazzaroth, whatever you want to call it. Um, so like the 12 constellations, there's significance, or the 12 zodiacal signs, there's significance with that, and also through these mythical beings throughout history, including the Greek and Roman interpretations and the Canaanite, like I was saying, and Jainism and Zoroastrianism, and anyway, and like Mars, so many figures that like represent Mars as well. Jupiter, Saturn, like even with Saturn, and I know I've said this a million times, but rules over Capricorn and Aquarius. And if you look at the constellations or the zodiacal images or symbols that represent Capricorn and Aquarius in tropical astrology, Capricorn is seen as it's represented by a goat, and Aquarius is represented by a human. And so you've got Saturn, a play on words very similar to Satan. So I think Satan was derived from Saturn and Saturnalia, etc. And for some reason, kind of like looked at to be the symbolic figure that is demonic, evil, etc. When it's in fact representing the winter months, I believe, and how it's colder. That's why there's like chattering of the teeth and fire and brimstone. Like you make fires when it's cold, and then and so this is when during the winter solstice period, which is the 21st or the 22nd of December, depending on if it's a leap year or a non-leap year, and the cycle of the sun. Anyway, and where the sun is the furthest south latitude at 23.4 degrees south latitude of the equator, the equatorial ring or belt, and traveling the ring or the circuit, Tropic of Capricorn is what we call it. And so that's when people in the northern regions of this earth are closer to the center, where 90% of people inhabit the earth, right, or live. This is where we experience our winter seasons. And so this is where we have the shortest days and the longest nights in the regions of earth that are further away from the sun. And then for 3 days, essentially, it's rising and setting, like it's traveling that Tropic of Capricorn region at that, and so where it appears to be dead, right? Because it's like not moving, it's at its lowest point, dead. And then on the third days, or on or around, depending on if it's a leap year or a non-leap year, the 24th or the 25th of December is when the sun is reborn. And then we start to, like, by the day, as the days pass, we start to have longer days finally. And then we go through the seasons, like I've said. And I'm going on all these tangents, but just to talk about, so during these periods, there's a lot of animals that hibernate or migrate, or they um, they die, unfortunately, because of the extreme temperatures. And there's a lot of food, like there's lack of food and foliage, and so the trees, they're not growing any fruits, so you're not able to eat that on the ground. Like, there's no fertile soil, it's covered in snow, or it's too cold. And we have a very short growing season too in a lot of different regions in Canada. And so, yeah, so you don't have a growing season for food. So, like, a lot of people, if you haven't properly prepared, or you had bad crops the year before, then, like, there's a possibility of starving during these periods. So when there's been periods of, like, mass famine or droughts or disasters that have made it where people can't grow food, this has been where there's been, like, again, like, periods where there's been, like, even cannibalism, unfortunately, or killing their own pets, or again, having, like, it's more complicated, right? You can't fish either unless you're ice fishing. I've done that before as well, but it's a little more challenging. And so that's the hell we're experiencing on Earth, right? And if you don't like winter and you're not properly prepared, it can be hell. And so, and then also, like, the correlation with the color red as well, or the root chakra, the lower levels of consciousness is represented again by Satan. So I don't think that there's I don't think that's an accident either. I think it's not a coincidence. And yeah, so I think that I could go on from there. So I just wanted to see what people think I should add. Should I add, just to be controversial, like the shape of the Earth? Should I add the moon landings, the Challenger stuff? Because it always gets people to not look at my stuff any further, right? So I've had these conversations with people that are in the security industry or high levels of government, and we've talked about January 6th. I've given them good information. They're really impressed. I've given them information about the Freedom Convoy, about 9/11, about so many other things, and JFK, RFK, Holodomor, USS Liberty, Northwoods. But as soon as I get into moon landings, it's like people shut it out. Agent Smith. And so I haven't even got to that level with a lot of people yet. A few people, yes, but that gets people turned off. And and then the Earth. Anyway, I'm gonna do another video to share, like a flat Earth video that I really like. But before I do that, I'm going to separate it. I'm not going to put it on this video because it's already too long, but I do want to share some stuff that I posted on my Instagram before I let people go. And by the way, my mother's visiting, but she was up early and she just wanted to lay down for a bit. So I took this opportunity to do a video. So this is from But It's Bustin'. Some of my other stuff already got removed. It's unfortunate. So 3 Ontario businesses fined for illegally employing hundreds of foreign workers. Police say. So 3 Ontario businesses have pled guilty and have been fined after a federal investigation into unauthorized employment uncovered more than 700 illegal foreign nationals. So this was the CBSA that did this. That's a lot of work to do that. So well done to the CBSA, and we need to keep it up. That's funny. Yeah. So I wanted to show you this post, if it will allow me. So Norwegian. Oh yeah, no, I didn't want to show you. But yeah, check this one out. It's wild. So this is one. CBC journalist breaks silence on COVID-19 coverage and impact on unvaccinated workers. So she was a veteran journalist, like, with a lot of years experience. And this was just a few years ago. I have shared this before, but I will share it again. And so, yeah, here. So 2021, federal workers required. Yeah, so anyway, here she is, a hero whistleblower that was from CBC, and she's spoken out. And I will say, I will add that I used to love watching CBC shows, and there are still some that are really funny. And it's unfortunate though that the journalistic teams, the news, have become completely captured and propagandized, and they are losing credibility. And that's why people want to defund CBC. It's not because we didn't like a lot of the other programs that they've developed and run across Canada. It's the friggin' they got to switch what they're doing. They got to fire people, because it's like, especially since 2019, CBC used to be way better. But anyway. Oh, you can't. Why you can't see it? Why can't you see it? I mean, why can't I speak friggin' English right now? This is weird. I'll pause this. I'm just gonna refresh, because I wish you can see my Rumble Studio, because it has it highlighted green on presentation. Okay. Weird. Let's try this again.
So even the swine flu,
I'm gonna refresh again. My bad.
COVID, that was a completely new ball game when COVID hit. So even the swine flu,
We got there.
we experienced that, during your career.
Yes.
None of this, it just started with COVID.
No, just
Okay.
it changed so quick that it left me spinning. And I mean, the way I saw it, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a synopsis, and then I'll get into specifics in terms of what was done with my stories. But that we betrayed the public. We broke their trust. And we had been riding on a reputation of excellence for years. And now we were quickly shutting down one side of the debate. And how were we doing that? We branded the doctors and the experts the CBC chose, that we used in our stories. We branded them as competent and trustworthy. And those who questioned and challenged the narrative were portrayed as dangerous and spreading disinformation. And that was regardless of what their specialty was, what their background was, and what their experience was. And I just also want to sort of give you a window into how this affected me personally. As a veteran journalist, I had solid contacts in the community. I had people calling me with stories. So I was seeing and I was hearing and I was absorbing all their stories of suffering and pain, and they were sharing them with me, and these stories weren't being told. Some of those were from the vaccine injured. Some were from people who had lost their job because of their vaccination status. Those whose families had been blown apart and they'd been ostracized. University students who were depressed over repeated lockdowns and mandates, and parents who were calling me that were agonizing on whether they should vaccinate their child or not. So all these stories were sitting inside of me. They were left with me, and I felt the crushing burden and the weight of their truth not being given a voice. And it affected my well-being because these people trusted me, and I felt I had failed them and I had let them down.
So can I just interject? So when you're a journalist and people are coming to you with stories that should be reported, you're feeling a responsibility to give voice to those stories, but you're not being allowed to do so for the first time, and that's what was causing the distress internally.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I was losing sleep. It was distressing. It was like I had failed these people as a journalist.
I get it.
To give voice to their truth. So I had witnessed in a very short time the collapse of journalism, news gathering, investigative reporting, and the way I saw it is that we were in fact pushing propaganda. And to define propaganda, it's information, ideas, opinions.
And so COVID.
Yep. I can relate. Guess who just got an award?
Accepting on behalf of George Soros is Alex Soros. Presidential Medal of Freedom is awarded to George Soros. Born into a Jewish family in Hungary, George Soros escaped Nazi occupation to build a life of freedom for himself and countless others around the world.
But they left out the best part.
While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews. My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all.
His inspiring generosity reminds us all of our capacity and our obligation to stand up to the abuse of
Oh
power
my God.
and to be guardians of democracy and all people yearning to be free.
It was actually probably the happiest year of my life, that year of German occupation. For me, it was a very positive experience. It's a strange thing, because you see incredible suffering around you, and in fact, you're in considerable danger yourself. But you're 14 years old and you don't believe.
George Soros didn't escape Nazi Germany until the end when it was starting to fail. Before that, he was all for it. I used to live in Budapest, Hungary back in 2015, 2016. And next to the River Danube, there's this, on the wall, these bronze shoes that are there because the Germans would line people up, tell them to take off their shoes, rings. They'd pull gold out of their mouths and teeth and stuff like that, take their clothes off, and then just shoot them and let them fall into the river. And that's what that monument is, into that stuff. And that's what George Soros was part of. And yeah, freedom, escaping Nazi Germany. And this is a guy that's funding all the other ridiculous stuff that's going on in the world today. By the way, he and Bill Gates are real good buddies.
Accepting a
So that was wild. Oh, I would love to get into my ChatGPT conversations regarding, like I was saying, Jerusalem, and countless times throughout history it's been taken over by Christians, Muslims, Jewish people, Canaanites, Romans, etc., Egyptians, and yeah. But it's already a long enough video. So on that note, I wasn't even showing you my face. On that note, I will leave it at that, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.